Welcome to the Living Room Vibe podcast. I'm your host, Danny Lourdes, creating a space where real people have raw conversations. Make yourself at home and let's get into it. Beautiful people, today I am truly honored to welcome someone special to the living room, someone who has been through a journey and has lots of wisdom to share. Please help me welcome Tina Allison to our space. Welcome, Tina.
Hey,
Welcome,
hey.
welcome. Hey.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much for being here and for agreeing to talk about such a tough topic, for some.
Yeah,
Um, but for those who might not know you yet, can you share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing in life and what's been going on with you?
sure. Like you said, my name is Tina. Um, what am I doing right now in my life? Surviving.
Yeah, that's real.
Trying to deal with this crazy world. But I am a wife and a mother of two. But yes, I'm currently homeschooling both of my kids. One is about to graduate, so that part is almost done. Although it's never really done. And I am a doula. And right now I am just living life, trying to raise kids and survive in this world.
The world of uncertainty.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So, um, for those who don't know, Tina and I go way back
Way back. Yeah.
to our college days, where her and I became friends. And one of my favorite memories with Tina is when we were working on a little project called My Brown is Beautiful with
Oh,
my
yeah.
sister and Katisha. And it's pretty much where we made a book reenacting pictures of influential Black women with our
Mhm.
daughters. And it was so
Mhm.
cool. It was such a fun experience because um, as we were our kids, picked people, they got to learn about them and we put in the book like little quotes about what they thought about them. And our
Yeah.
girls were so young. So it was just the
I
cutest
know.
thing. It was so fun.
I look at
Uh,
those pictures now and I'm like, who are those babies?
oh my gosh,
They're like a
Savannah, her missing tooth.
uh I know. I know. I think all of their teeth were falling out and growing back in. Those pictures are
Yeah.
so fun. They got, like, somehow out there
Yeah,
way
they went
more than I
viral.
think we yeah, I think that we thought that they would. I was like, "How are random people posting?"
It was crazy. And I cannot find those pictures digitally for real anymore. Like I know they're on like Facebook and stuff, but like I'm so glad that I did the book for everybody
I
because
love it. I
I
still
still
pull it
have
out and
it.
look at it 'cause
Me
it's such a
too.
beautiful little place in history. I was looking at it, the other day when, Nikki Giovanni passed. I know that was one of the
Yes.
people
Uh-huh.
we met, and she was such a amazing, you know, kind of person I looked up to in my personal life, and is now an ancestor. So glad
Yeah.
about that. But I literally just thought about the book the other day because of her passing. But that is a
Mm,
great memory to share together.
yeah. It was fun. It was fun.
It was fun.
So, I'm in this space where I'm learning that like joy and pain often have the same address.
Hmm.
Some days I feel like I'm a windshield, and some days I feel like I'm the bug on the windshield that got like splat across the
Yep.
face.
Right.
Um, and but I think in all of that, there's been growth.
Hmm.
And today we're having a conversation that's both deeply personal and universal to both of us, where we're talking about grief, specifically the loss of a sibling and navigating life as the child of a grieving parent. Um,
Yep.
this this is something that touches my heart personally. Obviously, for those who do know me, I lost my brother Dion to suicide, and it's been like having a piece of my heart permanently missing. Um,
Hmm.
and Tina, could you share your experience with the loss of your sibling and what that journey has
Absolutely.
been like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Last night when I was thinking about us getting together to talk, I was time is so funny, right? Um, because especially when it comes to grief, it it time it feels like it expands and contracts. Because I was like,
Mm,
wow, it's been so many years since my
mm.
brother has passed away. It's been almost 20 years,
Wow.
but I hadn't thought about that time frame until I was thinking about it last night. Because I'm not the kind of person that, like, kind of dwells on the dates,
Hmm.
um, but putting it into that kind of concrete space was like, "That's so long."
Yeah.
I'm like, "How is that so long but feels like it's still so fresh in a lot of ways?"
Mm.
Um, but yeah, so it's been about, 20 years almost. I was, uh just turned 16, and my brother was just about to turn 19. There's 3 of us. I'm the youngest of 3, the only girl, 2 older brothers. Um, so you can imagine how that went in life. I was very spoiled and the baby and, always well protected. But yes, when my brother was 18, I'm not gonna get too much into details just for my own family's sake and privacy, but, my brother was actually murdered. Um
Mm.
just an act of gun violence, kind of wrong place, wrong time type of thing. Not anything on
Wow.
his end. He didn't instigate anything. Just, you
He
know,
wasn't in a
a very
gang. He wasn't a drug
no,
dealer,
no.
like,
And that's,
all that
yeah,
stuff.
we could always get into that because that's usually what people think when I start telling the story, like, oh, literally, no, just
Mm.
in a convenience store egos probably, type of thing, and someone was armed that shouldn't have been armed and decided that's how they were gonna, take care of a situation. So that obviously, in talking about it, both of us, there's, you know, death of a sibling or any of that, there's no matter how it happens, it's always traumatic in some
Yeah.
senses
Yeah.
because we don't think about, we always think there's an order. Uh, like our parents will go first, and
Right.
then, we'll get super, super old, and then, our kids will live for long after us. So it's weird, it's like it disrupted
The
the
timeline.
flow of time, the timeline that was
Yeah.
supposed to happen. But yeah, so I just turned 16, my brother was about to turn 19, um, and it was in the span of one phone call, one night, our entire trajectory changed. Um, but you had asked about that or just about my background? I don't remember.
No, just about what was your experience like, with losing your sibling and like what was that
Yeah,
journey like for you going through that? I
got
guess
it.
if you can share a little bit about what it was like, getting that phone call, like did your
Okay,
mom have to explain to you like what was going on
got it.
or yeah.
Yeah, well, it was late at night. Again, in decades since, the lines are kind of blurry because you probably can relate to that. The moment you get that phone call or that information is, given to you, it who knows? Like the world
Right.
explodes.
Right.
Um, So it's sometimes I think is it that so much time has passed that the details aren't as fresh or that the details were never fresh because it was such a traumatic event.
Right.
But I remember we got a phone call. My mom was on the phone and it's what people describe like you will never forget that noise or that
Mm,
sound of that guttural type of yell or scream or cry.
mhm.
Um,
From your mom?
so from my mom, yes. So it was kind of confusing because we weren't sure exactly what was going on. I think that the call was more that something had happened. So my mom actually went to the location where she just knew my brother had gotten hurt or something.
Mm.
And I remember just being at home and kind of just being in that weird limbo of, is everything going to change right now? Or is this a bad dream? Or is it everything's fine? It just sounds worse. And then you get confirmation that, oh no, the worst case scenario actually has happened. Um, and that night is just such a, again, it's one of those things like time collapses on itself. It felt like the night was forever. And it also felt like all of a sudden it was the next day, and it was like,
Mhm.
what is this new reality that we're living in? But my oldest brother was actually with my brother when he passed. So that was also
Oh,
just
wow.
so completely traumatizing. I
So
remember just the automatic fear of knowing that these two other people's lives also imploded or
yeah.
exploded both, um, at the same time and just feeling so unmoored. Like,
Mhm.
I felt like just floating in space in a sense of, I what what does this all mean? Like, what is happening right now? How do you? Because there's no rule
Did
book. No one expects things like that to happen.
Right. Did your brother call your mom, or was it, like, police that called your mom?
The police.
Mm.
The police did. Um, so actually, you know what? No, I take that back. Um, I don't actually know. I'm sorry, I don't remember that.
No, it's fine. I was just wondering,
No,
because when you said
I
your
don't
other brother was
rem
there, I was like, "Wow," like
he was there, but I don't think he called her. That was the time, there wasn't any cell phones. Um,
right.
I think my somehow the word got to my aunt or someone, and they called them. It was not the police, sorry, I remember that now. But the word got to my mom because I remember her saying, I don't remember who the person was, but it was, "Something's happened, and you need to get over here,"
Mm.
essentially.
Yeah.
Um, but I do remember now that it wasn't the police because when my mom got there, I believe that there was a police presence then. Um, I haven't actually thought about that detail in a long time. So I don't
I
remember
know.
it exactly.
And if anything ever feels like I'm not ready to dive into that yet, just but I know
Sure.
you have no problem telling me, that you're
No,
like,
no.
I don't think I want to talk about that right now. A little too
Yeah.
raw for me. I was
I
just
just
thinking
remember the
about,
call, and it felt like all of a sudden my mom was gone. She was there, and I was,
mm,
like, at home, like, waiting for the news, like, "Is this a
oh,
real
so you were
thing? Is
left
he
at
just
home by
hurt?"
yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
So, I think maybe my aunt or someone came over. I remember I was making some phone calls to, at that time, the like mentor people from the church. Like I called some of them to come to let them know what happened, and they came over. But I was there. Like my mom and my brother obviously weren't there.
Mhm.
Um, so I that's the biggest thing I remember is just this limbo of waiting, of being like, was it just something really bad, like an accident? Because I didn't know what had happened. Didn't know
Right.
it was a shooting. It was just like, is he just really hurt? Is it, So being
I
in that limbo by
remember
myself.
I remember when I got the phone call about Dion, and um I was working,
Mhm,
and uh I tell my family, if I don't pick up and it's an emergency, like, call me back to back,
mhm.
and then I'll know I need to pick up. And I
Yeah.
had got this call from a number that said private, and I was like, well, who picks up private numbers these days? Nobody.
Yeah.
And so I was like, snooze, and it just kept working.
Mhm,
And then my mom called, but I was almost done with my client, and so I was like, I'll just call her back in like 10 minutes.
mhm.
Um, and so I just, snoozed it because I was going to call her back in 10 minutes when my client left. And then, but she called me back to back. And I was like, oh, okay. So I remember picking up the phone, and it was this white lady, which made my heart sink
Yeah.
because I was like, I immediately said, why do you have my mom's phone?
Yeah.
And, uh, and I just remember like my heart's like I just felt very heavy in that moment.
Mhm.
Um, And she was just like, and she didn't answer me. She just started going into who she was. I'm detective, blah, blah, blah. I just sounded like I was like, girl, I'm toning you out right now until you hear
Yeah.
I hear something that I need to hear.
Yeah.
like, um,
Mhm.
and she just was like, I'm detective, blah, blah, blah. And I'm so sorry to tell you that your brother has passed away. And then I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I got three brothers. Which one are you talking about?
Mm.
Like, give me the
Mhm.
details. And she said it was Dion. And then I was like, and my heart sank. And then I was just like, wait, well, why do you have my mom's phone? Like, where is
Yeah.
she? I immediately went to figure like, where's my mom? And my mom had, was at the hospital and, she, pretty much kind of fainted when they told her. So they were like, it's like I didn't even have time to process that she just told me that my brother had passed because everything in me was like, this take care of my mom. This is the
Yeah.
medication she takes. This is, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Let me
Mhm.
call my sister to get her there with you because I'm out of state. Like it just got into this whole thing. But then when she was like, okay, she's relaying all this information to the nurses that are with my mom. And she's like, okay, I'm going to call you back. And then she hung up and my client is still there. Like, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, and she's like, are you okay? And I was just like, no, my brother
Mhm.
died. And I didn't know it was suicide at the time.
Mhm.
All I knew was that. And it was weird because I didn't cry.
Yeah.
I don't know how I felt. But
Yeah.
I immediately started working again. I immediately just
Mhm.
I told her that. And then I picked up my tool and I just started doing her hair again. And she was like, and she just grabbed my hand and was like, Danny. And I was like, huh. And she was like, do you know what you just said to me? And I was
Mhm.
like, my brother died. And she was like, I want, is your husband home? Because at the time, Smith was working from home on some days. And she was like, is your husband
Mhm.
home? And I was like, no. He went to go pick up my kids from school. And then she was like, "I want you to call your husband." She was like, "Don't worry about my hair. I'm
Mhm.
gonna wait till you talk to him, and I know he's on his way, and before I leave." And I appreciate her so much in that time, just helping take care
Yeah.
of my mental,
Mhm.
because it just hadn't clicked for me in that moment. But yeah, that it's like that's always like that first distinct memory is that phone call
Yeah.
that you get.
And it's so interesting because, like, even as you're saying it, it's that's the same feeling of like, I'm trying to that's the best way I can express it is, like, time collapses on itself.
Yeah.
It's it's a weird feeling because it's like life is continuing to go on. It's like this
Mhm.
moment has happened, but it's crazy how it's like our brains absorb things, um, and protect us in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
but it just keeps working. If
Right.
that makes sense, like,
Yeah.
your body's natural reaction was to be like, "Okay, I heard that information.
Mhm. And my brain
I
was like,
haven't
"No, we're not gonna process
we're
that right
not
now."
we're not gonna process this right now. I'm gonna go into the mode of, 'How's my mom?' I'm the
Yes.
client." Because it's
Mhm.
like time is so strange in that moment. It's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, what do I do now? I guess I just keep doing," because I remember
Right.
that feeling of being like, "Oh, okay, I need to make some phone calls." Like, why do I need to think that in the moment? That I
Right.
need to
I
make some
literally
phone
was
calls.
like, "I need to call my other siblings. I need to finish this
Yeah,
lady's hair. I have to still also be professional because I'm at work." Like, I can't sit
yeah,
there and cry. Like, all that stuff really literally runs so fast through your brain.
so fast.
And your body will just pick one of them out of the sky. And at the time, my
Mhm.
brain picked just keep working out of the sky.
And
And so that's
it's an
what I
interesting
did.
thing because I think in some ways it is our brain trying to protect us to be like, "This is very big information."
Right,
So and again, no one expects that phone call. And I
right,
think especially when it comes into sibling relationships,
right.
it's you expect any other phone call before
And
that, like,
and I think that's why I was
something
like my
happened to
heart just
grandma, something
right.
yeah,
Or your mom, like
or your
after
mom,
which is
exactly.
why my heart sank because I was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna tell me my mom died. Like my mom's
Yeah,
gone. I was not
Yeah,
thinking in any level that I was about to hear anything about one of my siblings, like
exactly.
at all.
It's a very, strange reaction. It's funny though, you were saying that about the phone call, how much phone anxiety I've developed after that.
Mm.
Because anytime there's a phone call at a, like, an odd time
Yeah.
or, um, just an unexpected time, now my thoughts always go to something
Hmm.
must have happened, you know, or even when you heard someone else's voice on your mom's phone, it wasn't a, "Oh, maybe she lost her phone." It's
Right.
automatic,
Yeah.
something is wrong. Like, if my brother calls me at a random time during the day, I'm like, "Something's bad." What's happened?
Yeah. Even with
So
my
trauma
sister, my mom, and she's like, I'm like, what happened? And she's like, I was just thinking about you and wanted to talk to you. I missed you. And I'm like,
yeah,
oh, okay.
we now I start a lot of my phone calls with even my husband or my kids or my brother now if it's at a random unexpected time, our first words are, "Everything's okay." Da 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 da.
Mm. Yeah,
'Cause
my
it's
first words to them is, "Are you okay?" Like I before I say hello when my daughter
yeah,
calls me and I know she's supposed to be in school or
exactly.
somewhere else, and my first thing is, "Are you okay?" And she's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah." I'm just like, "Okay." It's just got
Yeah, it's like you are constantly prepared now for, and I'm sure
yeah.
we'll talk about that more, but when you said that about the phone call, I was like, "Oh, yeah." I
Hmm.
remember the first now being after the fact being like, any phone call, there's always a level of hesitation or bracing yourself.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how just trauma reappears in
Yeah.
unexpected ways.
In unexpected ways. Um, so I, people say like sibling relationships are kind of like branches on trees, growing in different directions, but always connected by the roots.
Mhm.
When I lost Dion, I felt like I was kind of navigating with a broken compass. Like I know what my brain is telling me where I should be going, but I was just like, I don't know how to get there. Um,
Mhm.
how did your sense of identity or your place in your family change after the loss of your brother?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's interesting how things differ based on where you are at that time in life because we share this very unfortunate situation together, but we also lost our siblings at very different ages.
Hmm.
You being an adult with kids, me being very young. So it's interesting to even hear how similar the stories can connect, but also in some ways how very different they are because like I said before, being the baby of the family, um, obviously there's the stereotypes are true. And being the only girl, definitely very true. But at the same time, and I imagine at some degree, you and Destiny probably can totally relate to this. I think when you're a sibling or a female sibling in a family with brothers in a black family, there's this underlying, and I'm sure it's generational, societal, all of this underlying feeling of having to mother
Hmm.
even if you're the younger one, because there's the fear of just harm as Black males,
Yeah.
of knowing that harm is always a possibility around the corner. Of, I spent so much time of my childhood worried that something bad was going to happen to them because that's just what society
Mm.
showed us. So
Yeah, for
even though
sure.
my place in the family was the youngest, I always felt like there was this. And I don't feel like it was an expectation necessarily put on me by anyone, but
Hmm.
myself of needing to make sure that they were okay.
I
Um,
think I think also it's the understanding of where you were, like where black men stood in society. So it wasn't
Absolutely.
necessarily that like your mom was like, help me raise these kids or
No,
whatever, but just I know what society has put black men and I have black brothers and I need to look out for them as much as I can to help be a secondary, spotsman almost for protecting them.
exactly. Yeah, there was never, my mom was definitely never like, you need to be responsible for them or whatever. But yeah, it was just that automatic, ingrained feeling of, I need to also make sure. Um,
Right.
that they're protected. So at 16, barely freshly 16, um, it felt like that expectation was compounded on itself, doubled on itself, because now it was that the thing you feared the most has happened.
Right.
And so now it's like you got to pull in everything even tighter, because what you feared would happen has happened. So now it's like it can't happen again. Like we can't have any other thing. So I remember just the feeling of I needed to be very I needed to insulate us
Mm.
a lot more, and that kind of um, pressure I put on myself of feeling like we need to get it even tighter, um, to each other. It's like make the bubble, the circle even tighter in order to keep us more protected because somehow there was some crack in the setup that allowed this to happen. Obviously, now as an adult looking at that one, that's way too much pressure for a child to be
Right.
taking on or considering or thinking, and that's also just not how life works. You can try to protect yourself as much as possible. Life is gonna still life. Um, there's nothing we
Yeah.
could do necessarily. We could take precautions, we could be cautious, um, but, there's only so much you can do to stop life from happening. But I do remember that feeling of now and again, no one asked me to do this, or there was no expectation of this, but of feeling like, "Okay, now I have to go in even harder with being on guard." Um, so I just remember a lot of that time feeling a lot of that emotional pressure
Mhm.
of, like, I have to be composed, I have to be put together because, like I said, my brother was there, and then my mom was experiencing a loss of a child. So I didn't necessarily feel like there was a lot of room for me
Mm.
to do anything except that. Because it was like in my mind, it was like they are so much more connected to the trauma directly
Yeah. Yeah.
to where it was like, got to take care of them first.
Do you feel like your relationship with was it the second brother?
Yes, the middle
Yeah. Do you feel
child.
like
Yeah.
do you feel like your relationship with your other brother, how do you feel like that changed? Were you more, I don't know, scared like whenever he left the house or when he did
Mhm.
like did you want him to check in more? Like, or if he was out too late, did you have anxiety? Like, did
Yeah.
that change in any way?
Yeah. I mean, the it's funny, we both have kids that have huge age gaps, um, or
Yeah.
bigger age gaps, uh, and that was kind of the age gap difference between me and my oldest brother. We all
Mhm.
were 3 years apart. So, he was in his 20s, at that time. So, it was interesting, my brother that passed, he was kind of the buffer between the 2 of us, because it was
Mhm.
like he was close enough to my age that I didn't feel like he was too much older. But my older brother, when you're 16 and someone's in their 20s, it's like they're like an old person.
Right.
It's like they're so much like so unrelatable to you.
Right.
So I remember even just in the natural order of things, I guess at that time, he was just older and doing his own thing. I was still in high school. So we were close, but not extremely close. So
Mhm.
I do feel like after he passed, and that's a lot of his own story. But because of the trauma of being there, he really checked out
Mm.
of like himself mentally, but also kind of out of the family of just he became even more, and him and I've talked about this now, um, as we're a lot older now, of just realizing he kind of separated himself because he didn't know how to deal with any of that.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate thing we probably will get into of just how, especially in the Black community, dealing with like grief, mental health, how do you approach all
Mhm.
those things in a healthy way? So he kind of checked out, but I know in those first couple days, months, that it was very much so the feeling of Where is he? What's going on? How is he doing?
Right.
There was definitely a lot of anxiety. Again, it's that I keep going back to that feeling of wanting to make the circle, the bubble, or whatever you want to call it, tighter. Of
Yeah.
being like, I need to know where you are because when you're out there, now I know not only these things are possible, but they do happen.
Right.
There's always that fear. I think, again, like we were saying, black men in this society in America, um, just, there's always a little bit of that fear, which I don't think a lot of people either talk openly about, even as siblings. Like you hear about mothers feeling that way about their kids. But
Hmm.
I think even as siblings, of knowing that when they leave out those doors, there's always that feeling in the back of your mind of their
Yeah,
safety.
for sure.
So that was completely heightened after. So I do remember there being lots of anxiety about not just his well being, like mentally, emotionally, but just physically of wanting to be like, I just want you to be inside the house. Like,
Right.
I don't
I
want you to
need
go
you
anywhere.
I need you to now become a hermit crab
Yes.
and stay home all the
Like,
time.
just stay home
Right.
and never ever leave our sight again.
Literally.
Um,
I kind of imagine, you know, I used to pick at the people who had leashes on their kids, but
yeah,
I definitely ended up having to do that at some point in my life.
exactly.
But like, having them on a leash, and you're too far, come back over here.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, you realize a lot of things after things happen to you. You're like, "Oh, now I
Yeah.
understand why sometimes moms go overboard about you need to
Yep.
be inside the house and stay where I can see you." Because a lot of that is just operating out of this fear,
Yeah.
because even if you haven't experienced it or before you experience it, of just being attuned to what's going on around us, of
Right.
being like, "No, there is a reason to fear." Um,
Yeah.
because, you can't it's walking that line even at that time, realizing even though my mind knew rationally that it wasn't like there was all of a sudden this more increased risk to him, but because something that was so unbelievable happened, that you knew could happen, actually did happen. It was like there was no rhyme or reason to
Right.
the way the brain operated. It was just like shut down and do whatever is necessary to protect.
Yep. To
And to me,
protect
in
and
my mind, that
conserve.
was don't be out of my line of sight.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When I think about grief, I think about how it can do like this quick pop up, kind of like how Florida
Mhm.
weather is. At 3 o'clock it's sunny. At 3:05 it's like some crazy thunderstorm, and then at 3:06 it's back
Yeah.
to being sunny. I think
Mhm.
about grief like that. It has those quick pop ups. One time you're in clear skies, and the next time you're drenched. What
Mhm.
have those unexpected moments of grief been like for you now that you're years down the line?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember after my brother passed, someone that I knew who I didn't know a lot of people who had lost family members, but I
Hmm.
I knew this one person who had lost their mom, and I was asking her like, "What does this look like? How do you keep moving in this or after something like this happens?" And probably the best thing she could have said, someone might be like, "That's not helpful," was just that, "I don't know because my loss isn't your loss." She's like,
Mm.
"Losing a parent is so different than losing a sibling, than losing
Oh yeah, for
even just
sure.
losing a mother, losing a father, losing a brother, losing a sister, losing a grandparent." Like, that grief takes different forms for all those different relationship dynamics. So I was, at that time, I was probably like, "That doesn't help me." But then it made sense. She was like, "I can't speak to how this feels for you. I've never lost a sibling.
Mm.
I've lost a mother, but I've never lost a sibling." So I feel like that's why I was so compelled to reach out to you to want to talk about this, because I don't, at least especially at that time, I sibling loss was just not a thing there's no one I could relate to, no one I could talk to, no one who had experienced any of that. So I didn't even know
Right.
how to navigate that. Like, how do you deal with that? How does this grief look?
Mm.
So especially at first, there's so much of the in that moment of the everyday, like, you know, at the very beginning, it's like you think about them to talk to them about this thing. Oh, they're not there.
Mm.
Or,
Yeah.
um, and that what that looks like now is like I remember when I had my first child of like, oh, like that realization hitting you of they'll literally never meet them. It's not like a, oh, because they live far away. It's like it's not even an option.
Right.
Like they can't meet them. And then I had my second child who was a boy, and he looked so much like my brother when he was an infant. Um,
Mm.
to where it was like, I can't even share that of being like, "Look how much your both of your little chubby faces." Um, I so there was that grief in that moment. So, there's the big life things. I think mostly people think
Yeah.
about holidays and birthdays and stuff, but then it's just the small things of, like, they said this funny thing to where it's like, "That reminded" my kids say this funny thing, "That reminds me of him," or, "This cool thing happened, and I have my mom and my other brother that I could share this with, but there's that
Yeah.
other person I can't," you know? And now I think there's just, for me, for whatever reason, those late nights falling asleep is usually when a lot of those thoughts come
Yeah.
of I've found it, uh, even all these years later, there's still those moments of it's like a pop where it's like, "Oh my goodness, they're gone."
Mm. Yeah.
Like,
Like a, a
like
new
they're
realization.
just yeah, and it's like 20 years later. So it's not that profound raw grief that I
Hmm.
felt at the very beginning, but there's still those moments of just like a little pop of oof, oof, you know, oof, they're gone or
Hmm.
they're not here and how permanent that is.
Yeah.
And I think that's more of how grief manifests itself in my life right now, these years later. It's just the permanence of it. That there's he's been gone, but he's going to still be gone, you know?
Right.
Like that's never gonna end. So again, it's not as raw as it was before, but there's moments when those little pops of like the remembering something or the wanting to share something. Sometimes it's just like a thought where it's like, oh, that would have been nice. And and other times it's still like it hurts. It's still a stab of like pain of they're just not here.
Mm.
So in a lot of ways, I if I could tell 16-year-old me what would it look like when you're 40, I would be like, okay, you're not going to feel as raw about it. And you're not going to go every single day feeling like, and again, I'm speaking just from my own experience, every single day of like just that raw, profound grief. But I genuinely don't know if there's still has been a day in these almost 20 years that I haven't thought about him.
Mm.
I j I just I even not in the, like, "Oh, I'm so sad" way, but just even the passing thought of it.
Right.
Um, and some days, again, it's just a passing thought, It's not at the forefront of my mind of my brother is dead, uh,
Right.
but it's always there. It pops up here and there and just in different ways, and I think now as I'm older, and you probably have had this thought as well, and I think this is kind of a common thought as you get to different ages. It's not so much like they didn't get here, but it's like, I can't believe I'm at this stage.
Right.
And like, what would they have looked like at this stage? So it's not even, again, back to that, it's not even so much like, oh, I wish they were here. It was like, oh, that's crazy. They won't ever experience this.
Like, he didn't have any children, or
Mhm.
anything like that. And I'm like, you know, he also never wanted kids, although
Yeah.
he was like the best uncle. And I'm like, because you're the best uncle, I think you'd be the bomb dad. Like, I think about
Yeah.
him as a dad and what he would be like. And I think for me, with my um points of like just those unexpected moments of like those rain showers, right? I think
Mhm.
I've been having to um really deal with my grief slash regrets,
Mhm.
and how they've been kind of popping up because I my brother lived in Florida, I'm in Georgia, so,
Mhm.
um, you just think you have time, and I think that's just been my biggest
Yeah.
regret is, "Hey, let's spend some time," or, "Hey, let's plan a trip," or, "Hey, let's do this." Like, we always had all these plans, and then something will come up with him or something will come up with me, and we'll be like, "But we'll get to it." Like, we know you're not
Mhm.
going nowhere, I'm not going nowhere, but then he went somewhere. Like, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna be able to do these things with you. My brother loved to go to concerts, like, he loves to just be out
Mhm.
and traveling and stuff like that, and so we talked a lot about doing things like that together and, um, just not having those memories, and I think just taking time for granted. I mean, I think we all do, right? Like, we all go to bed
Yeah.
and just assume we're gonna wake up in the morning. Like, we don't think, "Oh my gosh, like, will I wake up tomorrow? I don't know." Like, no, we go to bed, see you in the morning, love you, good night. Like,
Yeah.
like, that's just what we do with time, right? Like, we just assume we're just gonna keep going until it's
But I
interrupted.
also think, again, it's the as humans, as creatures, we adhere to this timeline of things where, yes, we always expect more time, but I think it's almost more natural to especially expect more time with our siblings because it's like we're supposed to
Right,
continue this road together. Like, I
right,
know my parents are gonna pass before me. Like, that's
right,
just the expectation.
right.
Um, and so, yeah, even the difference of my father, we were estranged, but he passed away, like, 3 years ago, and that's a different kind of grief of being an estranged parent and all that, but still being their parent. That wasn't a shock in the same way. Like,
Right,
it was sad in its own ways, but it's not shock. So I
right.
think that's the case. There's always not gonna have been enough conversations, not enough, but I think there's just this expectation as siblings, like, "But I don't have to feel rushed about it with you."
Mhm.
You know?
Right.
Like,
Like
sometimes I feel rushed about it with with parents. You can see that in parental relationships because 'cause you're like, the time is limited. They're your parent.
right.
There's
My
so
my
much more
mom's getting
time.
older, like, you start to see
Exactly.
them deteriorate a little bit, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I need to start prepping."
And I
But
think that's presented to us in when we think about just death in general. It's like we
yeah.
prepare for those things for the grandparents, for the parents, for the
Yep,
older people,
yep.
but we don't prepare for this almost parallel relationship with a sibling. So I think it's just very normal to assume, like you were saying, you are gonna just always be there. Like,
Yeah,
we could get to that later.
yeah.
But sometimes these things obviously things like this happen and we realize that there isn't always that time, but at the same time, I wouldn't want anybody to live with that kind of anticipatory grief.
Yeah,
Hearing these
yeah.
kind of stories and being like, "Oh, no, now I have to take every moment for
Right.
granted."
Right.
This is the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
It's not the rule. These things don't happen, and if my brother was here, I would love the privilege of taking time for granted, you know,
Right.
of just
Right?
having I would not wish to be in this place to be like, I wish I had more time." It's like,
Yeah.
just eh, so if someone's listening to this and they haven't lost a sibling, yeah, maybe make a little bit more effort, but don't live hampered with that kind of anxiety of
Right.
like, every moment might be our last. Like, you're allowed to be annoyed with them. You're allowed
Yes.
to hate them one moment. That's just a normal
That's life.
relationship. It's
Right.
just life. Um, so I wouldn't wish that on anyone else, but I can totally relate to that feeling of, just being like, I will never see him as an uncle to my kids. Like
Yeah.
you were saying, like your brother would have been a great dad. Like, I think about it, even just looking at my son now, my youngest, and thinking about his relationship with his future nieces and nephews. Like, oh my gosh, you're gonna be the best uncle. You're so cool. And then thinking the next thought is, oh wow, I wonder what he would have been like as an
Mhm.
uncle to them. So there's
Yeah.
that loss in that too. But then there's also that, you know, kind of we can't ever like really have our children or try to live vicariously through anyone, but there's a small part of me that's like, well, maybe through him I can see some of that. I
Mhm.
could see what
Mhm.
he would have been like. I could see how that relationship would have developed between if I was in his place as the sister and seeing that happen.
Yeah.
That I can, even heal in that sort of way of seeing that. And even with my older brother, seeing his relationships at times with his kids of being like, it's a small glimpse in a sense to
Yeah.
that future that was lost. Like you could see it in small ways in some ways. And that's I consider those little, you know, little graces that we get to
Mhm.
have, to be able to see it reflected in other people. So I don't take those for granted. I think
Yeah.
that's important to remember because when you can see it, to appreciate those little moments too.
Mm. Wow, 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 guys. So we are getting close to time, and we haven't even gotten to the point of discussing the part about what it's like being the child of a grieving parent. So, this episode is going to be broken up into two parts. If you want to continue to hear the second part of Tina's story, you'll just have to come back next week. And don't forget, we drop new episodes every Wednesday. I hope to see you there. That's all for today's episode of the Living Room Vibe podcast, where real people have raw conversations. I'm your host, Danny Lourdes. Thanks for vibing with me. If you're feeling the vibe, follow us on Instagram at the LRV podcast, as well as hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It helps more people find their way to our living room. And as always, thanks for listening. Bye.